Can you still see me, Skip?
I can see you on Zoom. The
cool.
question,
okay.
And presumably I will be able to see you on YouTube in a moment. Yes, I can see you on YouTube as well.
Okay.
And so what I normally do is I monitor the chat on YouTube and not on Zoom, although I'm going to be more careful because last week I kind of shut one of the participants out inadvertently on the YouTube, or I guess on the Zoom. I wasn't paying attention to things he was saying. And I'm hoping some others will join, because I read this paper yesterday, and I had 345 hits in the last 19 hours only on this.
Oh, wow.
I said, wow, what's happening? Because that's more hits than I normally get, with the exception of, oh, here's Miles. I have to promote him too, I know. Just a moment. Come on. Oh, wait a minute. Allow to talk. Okay, more. Promote to panelist. Okay, that he should come up here in a minute. Hello, Miles. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, hi, Skip. Thank you.
Anyway, yeah, so I was saying to myself, wow, I understand this. And not only that, I learned something. Maybe you're, as a science professor, you know more than I, but I had heard of the distinction between particles and waves in light, but here these guys are saying that it's in everything.
Right.
And had you heard that before? You know that before?
Yes, in the way that you kind of know that biologically is is both photosynthesis and cellular respiration are, again, especially photosynthesis is a process by which you use the wavelength particles. That's kind of what, that's what the thylakoids and the chloroplasts exactly do, they catch those waves. That you are able to use the falling electrons from those waves to generate energy to make sugar. And so you learn that biologically. That's a very practical application of some of the physics that that's talked about in this paper, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. But again, photosynthesis is we're still talking about light, but this is more than that.
Oh, absolutely it is.
And, yeah. And so good evening, Jerome. Welcome. And hello, Brandy. And hello, Isaus.
Hey, Skip. How you doing?
Good. We seem to have a lot of interest in this tonight. I read the first half of this paper yesterday into the YouTube channel and had 345 hits on it in 19 hours. So there seems to be a lot of interest in this out in the world. And and good evening, Tim. So good to see you. Okay, let's see. It's only 8:01. I have to admit to all of our YouTube followers that I don't know a lot about quantum physics, but in reading this, I think I have a very, very basic understanding of it. There may be others that are better than me. But I think I found this article very surprising. And so tonight we're talking about this article, which is entitled Carl Gustav Jung, Quantum Physics and the Spiritual Mind, Mystical Vision of the 21st Century. And I have always sort of shied away from using the term mystic with respect to Dr. Jung, because I always felt that the things that he said and wrote about were empirical. In other words, they came out of his clinic. And so we have to get into this essay pretty far in order to fully understand it. But anyway, did any of you have any opening comments that you want to make? Because otherwise I'm going to read this sort of paragraph by paragraph, maybe sentence by sentence, and then we'll talk about it as we go, because it's such a complicated idea, basically, for most people.
The only opening comment I have was the section 3, the basis of the material world is non-material. In that's kind of, I got through section 3 reading in preparation, but it struck me that the first statement that Philemon makes in the 7 sermons to the dead is it starts with this nothing, and I think it just that kind of stuck in my mind.
Right.
When I read this section, the basis of the material of the material world is non-material. So
right.
Anyway.
And so it almost says, it basically says, the theologians were right. And
Right.
the other thing that surprises me is, okay, we built this CERN ring in Switzerland and France and part of Italy, I guess, that has a 17-mile circumference, or 17 kilometers circumference. And part of the objective there was to prove the Higgs boson, which some people were calling the God particle. And so we spent billions of dollars, and the Europeans spent billions of dollars on that. And at Fermilab, we spent more billions of dollars on similar things to find whether the Higgs boson is really there or not, and among other things. But finally, and I think it was 2016, they did demonstrate that the Higgs boson actually exists in the physical world, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so all these things relate to the physical world. And what quantum physics seems to be talking about is a non-physical world. And this is why, well, I've kidded with Gray a few times that there's this idea of the unified field theory, and physicists have never been able to find the unified field theory that unifies quantum physics with Newtonian physics. And I have joked that the unified field is the human being.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
So maybe that's true. I don't know. But anyway, we'll see. And I'll look forward to your comments. Good evening, Nick. And hi. Okay. Glad to have you all here. And it looks like we have 13 online right now. We had 345 people read or download, listen to part of this article when I read it yesterday in the last 24 hours. And so there seems to be significant interest in this. So I'm going to start with the abstract, and then we'll take it from there and see what you all have to say and what our listeners on YouTube. Now, I normally on these Monday night events, I normally focus on the YouTube chat. So I don't know if you're in the panel and you want to get my attention, please jump up and down or something, or else put something in the YouTube chat. So anyway, the abstract. So this is by two gentlemen whose names are Diogo Valadas Ponte and Lothar Schäfer. And they wrote a book in 2013, published by Random House, entitled Infinite Potential: What Quantum Physics Reveals About How We Should Live. And this long article is basically a promo for that book, I would have to say. But in any case, the abstract. We describe similarities in the ontology of quantum physics and of Carl Gustav Jung's psychology. Now, what I would say is ontology, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on this, so maybe others might opine, ontology relates to how a certain way of thinking articulates, something like that. Would you?
Metaphysics, like the Google says, metaphysics of being. It's usually a theology term. I know that.
Okay. So it's metaphysics of being. Okay.
Yep.
But so it's the metaphysics of being, though, of quantum physics also. So anyway, in spite of the fact that physics and psychology are usually considered as unrelated, in the last century, both of these disciplines have led at the same time to revolutionary changes in the Western understanding of the cosmic order, discovering a non-empirical realm of the universe that doesn't consist of material things, but of forms. These forms are real, even though they are invisible, because they have the potential to appear in the empirical world and act in it. We present arguments that force us to believe that the empirical world is an emanation out of a cosmic realm of potentiality, whose forms can appear as physical structures in the external world and as archetypal concepts in our mind. Accordingly, the evolution of life now appears no longer as a process of the adaptation of species to their environment, but as the adaptation of minds to increasingly complex forms that exist in the cosmic potentiality. The cosmic connection means that the human mind is a mystical mind. So, any comments on that?
The evolution, talking about evolution in how these things came into our minds. It's kind of personality in psychological types that Jung talked about, that the psyche creates reality every day, and how we interact with that reality comes both with what we're experiencing outside, but also how we're experiencing the things we're feeling inside as well.
Right.
And those figures, those forms, those inspirations kind of come to us as visions or thoughts or feelings or emotions even, and actually that's how the energy flows through it. And it seems like that's what consciousness is attempting to do, is help us understand that, right?
Right.
We get to 4.
So one of the ways that I have described archetypes is it's like a dry riverbed into which you put the water of life. And so a very simple one for purposes of our global community here is the archetype of mother, where when a girl is a girl and she might be a tomboy, but once she becomes a mother, she's a mother, and she's a mother for the rest of her life. So her experience of the changes in her body that make her a mother are never going to go away once that water of life passes through that dry riverbed. In other words, all young girls have the potential to be a mother. That's a potential. But once it happens that they become a mother, then they're a mother, and that archetype constellates, as we say, which means it becomes real and an experience in that young woman, and she knows what it means to be a mother then. Before that, she may have had an idea of what it might be like to be a mother, but once she's a mother, there's no going back. Any other comments, Jerome?
Well, I was thinking about the formless becoming form, and he's trying to relate this to our mental activity has evolved, and we've created from these forms all sorts of with tool use, and we've come to such an extent that we've done that we've been elevating our mind consciousness in terms of and also as opposed to the what we would call the primitive instinctual consciousness. So we've got almost two conflicts here. But what I think what he's saying is these forms that are not forms are just waiting to constellate into something that's needed for this particular time.
Right.
And I think that's
into which you put the right stuff, as
right,
they call it, right?
Yeah.
And so an example might be a church or a cathedral like Notre Dame, where once the idea of a church or a temple started to be developed a few thousand years ago, then that articulated out, and it got to the point where, you know, if you go around the United States, maybe 90% of all churches, seen one and seen them all. They're more or less the same. You know, you go into, whether it's Catholic or Protestant church, you go into Catholic or Protestant church, and it's got pews, it's got a pulpit, et cetera, and they're more or less the same. So that's an archetypal thing that built out. And, you know, I can't say that that's true of a Jewish temple because I don't know enough about Jewish temples. But, you know, obviously I've been all over the Far East, and everywhere you go, you find Buddha or Buddha statues, and they're all more or less the same once they articulate it into consciousness and into reality. So anyway, question here. Isao says, the riverbed or channel is how Jung described the action of the Wotan on the German people under the influence of National Socialism. I don't remember that about Wotan, but I have no doubt that that's probably true. Wotan was an essay that is in volume 10 of the collected works, and it was written in 1936, and it can be taken as Jung's warning to the German people about what was happening to them in terms of their psychic epidemic that was leading to World War II. But he had to be careful. He lived in a country that was surrounded by fascists, and by that time, his books had been burned, and he was on a list of people that if they were captured would have been executed and so on. So he was very careful about what he wrote there. He mainly wrote to people who would understand his psychology. And Nick says, but are archetypes only psychic mental? Jung's own understanding evolves, later dealing with the cycloid. Well, the cycloid is another layer of the psyche. Does anyone have any wisdom on that? Do you want to comment on that? I can comment on it, but it's, go ahead, Gray.
I remember you doing and reading those videos from about the cycloid layer, but I can't remember any of that substance. But I think that would be a good reminder, because I do think the cycloid layer does have implications for this topic of physics.
Surely it does. And whenever you have a conversation, including this one, okay, we've entered into a cycloid layer at this point. In other words, as we focus on this conversation, the panelists and the viewers, archetypal things can definitely come up in the cycloid layer, but anytime that you have a conversation with someone, you enter into a cycloid layer. So you can be talking to somebody in a coffee shop or whatever, and you know, male or female, opposite sex or same sex, and the rest of the world just drops away, and you have something going just between you and that person, and or you and a group of people. And so you're not thinking about what's happening. You know, if there's a waiter that comes in and interrupts you, it's kind of irritating that they're interrupting your conversation, because you're in the flow of this space. And so my understanding of the cycloid layer is basically that. And that there's a book by Anne Belford Ulanoff entitled The Cycloid and the Soul, or something like that. I don't have it right handy, but I did read some of it into the advanced group. And what she said is that there's sort of 3 levels of psychotherapy. One level is to, you know, the therapist is talking to the individual and they're saying, well, you know, what's happening to you happens to everyone, or it happened to me. Okay, so that the person being analyzed doesn't feel alone, and that's already, you know, something like what you might have with in a coffee shop with a friend, where, you know, you tell a friend, well, this happened to me, and they say, oh yeah, that happened to me too. And then you don't feel alone. And so then you feel better about the fact that you're not alone. Then there's a second layer where, you know, basically the therapist says, well, this happens to everyone. Okay. And then the third layer, the third stage, is when the analyst is talking about dreams and that sort of thing. And that's when they're really getting into this cycloid space. So the analyst and the analysand are, you know, making everything else fall away, and they're thinking about what's in this person's dream type stuff. And by talking about it, then the analyst knows how to help someone get past that mental blockage. And so that's what I think the cycloid layer is. And so ISO says, doesn't the cycloid connect with the pleroma? And I think that that is true. And Damo says, psychosis is the interface between body, physical, and spirit. Okay, I don't know about that, and we're not going to get into that more deeply right now. And
well, Skip, I'd say that what we're talking about is you're entering into the same consciousness level as the other person. It's kind of like a bubble.
right.
And so, as you said, everything falls away. So you're in that zone,
Right.
that you're talking in.
Right.
Now, I want to relate this back to the comment about the Wotan. Is what we're talking about here is how we're all interconnected. And from a deep collective consciousness standpoint, what happened with Wotan is there was an old archetype that was sitting down there neglected, and he was caused to emerge, and it was an instinctual thing, and it spread like wildfire, just like this.
Right.
And so what we're talking about is really that very same principle as what we're talking about here.
Right.
Is that we are connected by different threads in the matrix and so forth.
Right, which is one of the things that this gets into.
Right.
Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go on, and I'll let the conversation on the YouTube chat continue. Introduction. When René Descartes declared that the world consisted of 2 kinds of material, i.e. thinking substance and extended substance, and when Isaac Newton declared that God in the beginning formed matter in solid, massy, hard, impenetrable, movable particles, so very hard as never to wear or break in pieces. Western science then became a form of materialism, and anything that wasn't matter didn't matter. When Darwin introduced Newton's materialism into biology, having or not having stuff became the essence of life, and greed and aggression became the natural virtues of our society, segregating one individual from the next, one country from another, and one species from the next. In this way, the classical world was a segregative world, and all aspects of life were affected. The physical sciences had nothing to do with ethics, philosophy, had nothing to do with the arts, and the order of the universe had nothing to do with the way in which we should live. As Jacques Monod described it, man must at last wake out of his millenary dream and discover his total solitude, his fundamental isolation. He must realize that, like a gypsy, he lives on the boundary of an alien world, a world that is deaf to his music and is indifferent to his hopes as it is to his suffering and his crimes. Okay, any comments there? Okay, moving on. In this totalitarian materialistic environment, Carl Gustav Jung had the courage to propose that our mind is guided by a system of forms, the archetypes, which are powerful, even though they don't carry any mass or energy, and which are real, even though they are invisible. The archetypes exist, as Jung described, in a psychic system of a collective, universal, and impersonal nature. Out of this system, the invisible forms can appear in our mind and guide our imagination, perception, and thinking. Okay, we may have covered that. Any comments there?
He also mentions it's an impersonal nature.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important concept, is because nature, if you think about it, doesn't really care. You know, it just happens. And but at the same time, there's all sorts of cooperation, even in the animal and plant world, and bees and flowers and hummingbirds and all this. They're all interconnected in terms of how they support each other in life,
Right.
in terms of the biological sense. So there's something going on, you know, that's causing this to happen, so that they do support each other.
They do support each other, but it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, even for us.
Well, yeah.
We all life lives on other life, and so you know, if you're not going to eat life, then you can't go to the grocery store anymore, right? Because the only things at the grocery store used to be alive. And so this point about impersonal nature, as you correctly point out, Jerome, is one of the points about, you know, one of the disputes about what God is. Okay, God created us, and but he doesn't really care about individuals per se, except as we lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps and are made in his image, I think is the way to put it. But
well,
I'll share an anecdote.
Go ahead.
So I'm part of a couple of other online communities, one of which is about attending to the climate or ecological emergency. And the person that is kind of leading that group, although he does try to be very open to everybody being able to have their say, nevertheless, he sort of often steps in and tries to turn the conversation to what he thinks is a priority. So the case in point is, he says, well, we've got this situation that we need to correct. So let's not worry about trying to figure out who's to blame or what went wrong. We have to take some interventions right away. So his perspective, and he's actually working with somebody in Harvard, is what's called solar radiation management. And that is that with losing the Arctic ice, we have to recover or restore some reflectivity to keep the temperature down. And so solar radiation management, one form of it is to create massive amounts of thin film reflective material. Now, the thing is though, my thought is, no, we really do need to talk about not just issues, but problems, like ultimate root cause of how it is that we got to where we are. So like, for example, why is it that we're sitting here with nuclear weapons pointed at each other on hair trigger alert? Again, it's a problem that we need to drill into, not just nibble around the edges talking issues, in my opinion. So
but we got here because we were also problem solving.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is at a higher level, we should really care about these deeper issues of soul and spirit. As insofar as creating meaningful existence. So what I guess I'm saying is that we should pursue the truth and hold that in high regard. Even if we do destroy the place, at least we will have said, well, we almost got to the solution, or we did figure out what went wrong. And that's purpose in itself, meaning and purpose in itself, even if things do go to pot, right?
Well,
am I making any sense?
Yeah, but I guess the problem is that the solutions have often come with blood up until now. So, in other words, the origins of World War I, let's say, came out of animosities from the 19th century. And then, at the end of World War I, we decided to be vengeful against the Germans. And that didn't work out too well because the Treaty of Versailles was quite punitive. And the problem was that young people were coming along then, and the Germans were reproducing their population, and those young people didn't have the experience of World War I, and so they had to be taught all over again in a way, and what.
So I guess what I'm hearing you talking about is you're talking about caring about the past and caring about what is the truth of the real history, not just the history we may have been fed. So I'm thinking this is the cosmic connection, means the human mind is a mystical mind. Some of us actually, people here really care about the spirit of truth,
Right.
Not just the material world.
Right. And I think this talks to us very deeply about the fact that we need experienced people in our leadership, people that have been through the mill one way or another, and who have learned from it and learned what we have to do to maintain civilization and what can destroy civilization. And we have to have people that make judicial decisions. And so, one of the good things about American leadership is there's so many people in the leadership at every level of government, for example, that we have enough experience out there. It may take time to work through, but we have enough experience. And so when something isn't working out, we have a chance of changing it. Whereas in an authoritarian government, you have one guy usually, who's making all the decisions. And if that person is a psychopath or is is guided by some mystical vision, as Adolf Hitler was, then he can run the whole society off the cliff, and what you have is all the crockery broken in your country until there's so many people dead that you have to stop fighting the war, and then you start over again. And
yeah, I'd like to, the great thing, as you say, about the United States is at the same time it's the best of places, or at the same time that it's the worst of places, it's the best of places, as you said, because there is the intellectual freedom for us to have conversations like this.
precisely.
And there's a professor of science of government at Harvard University, distinguished liberal political scientist and government advisor named Samuel Huntington. And he observed, quote, "The architects of power in the United States must create a force that can be felt but not seen. Power remains strong when it remains in the dark. Exposed to sunlight, it begins to evaporate." And so he's saying that there is a force of power that we need to confront, and he goes on to say, he gave some telling examples concerning the real nature of the Cold War. He was discussing U.S. military intervention abroad and observed, and quote, "You may have to sell intervention or other military action in such a way as to create the misimpression that it is the Soviet Union that you are fighting. That's what the United States has been doing since the Truman Doctrine." So it's people like that who are, saying, okay, let's actually drill into the truth, and let's address the fact that there are a lot of people who are materialistic in thinking, and they're just interested in lining their own pockets. The sales of B-52 bombers is very profitable to Boeing, for example,
Right.
and so on. But so anyhow, there's people that are willing to confront these things, and
right.
and that's what the Spirit of Truth is all about.
Sure. Let's not get too far afield on these political questions for now, though, because we do want to get through this. And one question on the YouTube chat is, would this emergence be analogous to Jung's conflict between the spirit of the depths and the spirit of this time? And I think that that's kind of what this discussion the last 10 minutes has been about. And Dan says, I have a doubt about the nature and difference between male and female subconscious, or I think we probably mean unconscious in this case. And, are there differences? Yes, assuredly, I would say. I mean, we don't have any women here tonight, but I think we can all admit that there are differences between a traditionally masculine perspective and a traditionally feminine perspective. Then ISO says the authoritarian leader figure is also, however, present in our Western collective shadow. Yes, that is absolutely true. And sometimes that shadow emerges and gets out of the box, and we have to hope that we have enough people who have wisdom. And that's, it's been the tradition for thousands of years that, the older leaders often have wisdom and hold the society together when it can't be held together by young people who haven't experienced enough, I guess, in life, let's say.
One thing I wanted to point out real quick is it's really easy to point out the archetypal patterns of the collective, or the archetypal patterns that you see the group moving through. But one of the things with materialism and Newtonian reductionist materialism that we think our scientific thinking is based on, and that kind of permeates our culture. That's also powerful on the individual level. And I do think like it's powerful because it's very simplistic, and it offers a very simplistic snapshot understanding of the world. And people are able to do that. And that's one of the problems, is that's how or that seems to be problematic if you allow it to kind of get swept into the collective without noticing, and then the archetypes start to live themselves out rather than you communicating with them, or rather than you living out your archetypal patterns, kind of in union, so to speak, right? The reductionist scientific materialism, just kind of reduces everything to very small, explainable pieces that don't really sink you down into the depths.
Yeah, they don't fit together necessarily.
Right.
Or they don't give you enough depth.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's why we need more self-aware leaders, and to get them into those positions. I know Skip, you went to the Center for Creative Leadership, which is a very well-known institution where they train majors and all the upper staff, and it lets them become self-aware of these problems that may crop up and occur.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to get more of the leaders into something like that in order that they would become aware of that. And unfortunately, our politicians haven't been to that school, I guess. But,
well, I mean, if they've been in the military, they may have been. I mean,
that's correct. But right. I mean, I worked with the military all the time, and they were just and had gone through the program, and they're very aware of the danger of these archetypal energies coming up and how to keep that in balance, so to speak. So
right. Yeah. Let me read on here. As it turns out, Carl Gustav Jung's revolutionary views of the human mind are in perfect agreement with the discoveries of quantum physics, which during the last century also came as a shock because they revealed the fundamental errors of classical physics and led to a radical change in the Western view of the world. The quantum phenomena now force us to think that the basis of the material world is non-material, and that there is a realm of the world that we can't see because it doesn't consist of material things, but of non-material forms. These forms are real, even though they are invisible, because they have the potential to appear in the empirical world and to act on us. They form a realm of potentiality in the physical reality, and all empirical things are emanations out of this realm. There are indications that the forms in the cosmic potentiality are patterns of information, thought-like, and then they are hanging together like the thoughts in our mind. Accordingly, the world now appears to us as an undivided wholeness in which all things and people are interconnected, and consciousness is a cosmic property. Okay, and I think this comports with Donald Hoffman's ideas that, which came first, the idea or the physical, did we come out of rocks or did rocks come out of us? Some type of thing, but it's quite in keeping with what Dr. Jung said in paragraph 752 of Answer to Job, in which he said that every religious statement of whatever type is a statement of the psyche and not a statement of the physical world, which means that the fact that some people say that the Bible is physically true, I'll say that every word in the Bible is true in the psyche, as I will say the same thing of all religious texts of whatever type, all scripture. and they're true to somebody, okay? Whether they be Buddhists or Hindus or Jews or Muslims, every religious statement is true in the psyche, but that does not mean that they're necessarily true in the physical world. And so to the extent that the Bible is a history book and accurately portrayed, okay, yes, it probably is physically true in the physical world, but you know, I'll just leave it at that and let you folks comment.
I would add that I think scripture is true for everybody at a certain level.
Yes.
And when I have trouble with scripture, I just have to find a different level where it is true for me.
Good way to put it. So Art says, sorry to be late. Can someone give me an update? I'm sorry, Art, that's going to be too complicated, but we're still in the beginning. So you haven't been lost yet. So let me read the next paragraph here, which is, in this essay, we will describe the similarities between Carl Gustav Jung's psychology and quantum ontology. Our description will show that Jung's teaching is more than psychology. It is a form of spirituality. By spirituality, we mean a view of the world that accepts the numinous at the foundation of the cosmic order. In the same way, quantum physics is more than physics. It is a new form of mysticism, which suggests the interconnectedness of all things and beings and the connection of our minds with a cosmic mind. And I just observed that Michio Kaku, who's a famous television physicist, made the comment once that every atom in the universe is connected to every other atom in the universe. And that's basically what we're saying.
It's kind of like a matrix. It's what you look at. If you, I always use the computer model of terms of it's really a matrix, and there are different levels, and they're all interconnected in some form or fashion. But I mean, that's
Right.
just using that. But I mean, I really like the idea, and also I was thinking from a biological standpoint. You know, in each cell of your body, you have the whole DNA code in each cell.
Yes.
So it's there, it's ready to make whatever it needs to make to support that particular cell. So each cell of your body contains that whole structure, which is phenomenal if you think about it.
Right. Okay, we have a question here. ISO says, isn't thinking about metaphysical questions of the existence of God as viewing the depths through the lens of the times? How do we simply view through the depths? Well, I don't know. I think that different people are taken by different religions, so they can see through and see certain levels. But I mean, I certainly do. I mean, I have experiences almost daily that are synchronicities, which, you know, have the divine involved in them one way or another. And I've, you know, done a long formal talk about some of those in my talk about finding the living God. So anyway, other comments here?
Well, you mentioned the numinous. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you think the numinous is? And I always think of it as more of a bright, you know, it's an uplifting feeling to me in terms of everything seems to be connected at that point to that
Right.
experience.
And that is what it's about. Let me see. Somewhere here I have, oh my goodness.
I would say it's kind of breaking out of the individual layer into the cosmic layer. Anytime you have a feeling of connection with something larger than yourself, that's a numinous experience.
Right. I was trying to find the definition of numinous, which is where did I have that? I had it in my talk. At the beginning of the talk on this channel called Finding the Living God, you will find a definition of the numinous. But, I can very quickly, just for anybody that hasn't seen it before, show you this numinous moment that most people here have seen. But since there's some new folks here, okay, so I was in the chapel at the U.S. Naval Academy one day in a very depressed mood, and it was very dark in the chapel, and suddenly there was light only on me. And when that happened, it completely changed my attitude about life, completely changed it instantly. It just changed. And so that would have been a numinous moment. I don't want to go into it longer than that, but
it kind of expanded your consciousness.
Yeah, definitely.
After it happened, so that's the effect of it, and it makes your consciousness wider.
Right,
and that's kind of what we're looking for.
Yeah. So here's the selfie I took when I turned the camera back on myself. Then, because you can see that I'm looking like I'm about to giggle, which I kind of was, because I said to myself, nobody's ever going to believe this unless I take a picture of it. So I'm going to take a photo of it so that people can see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you look very numinous there.
Yeah, I mean, I was all lit up, and of course, you see images like that in movies. There have been movies where, about saints and so on, where light has come on the saints and so on. So that's a very archetypal idea, and then all of a sudden it happens to you, and you say, "Oh my God, this is actually happening to me." I mean, it's not just in a movie; it's happening to me. And
you can almost use the word luminous instead of numinous.
Well, in that case, certainly. Right. But sometimes it doesn't involve light. Sometimes it involves an idea or something. And
well, what we're doing, in quantum physics, to quote Paul Levy, who I heard interviewed on Buddha at the gas pump, quantum physics, we're delving down into the micro substructure of the physical world. Right. And, as we go deeper, we're finding some strange things happening. The physicists are telling us,
Right.
And, and for you, or ourselves here, we're similarly probing our psyche to the deepest depth.
Precisely.
The rest of the day I've spent, I have been spending it on some deeper thinking, but by the same token, most of us, especially in our day-to-day work life, we're just very materialistic and mechanistic, going about daily routines of making money and going to the store to fill the refrigerator. But we at least come together here and are delving into the deepest depth of our psyche, which takes us to the numinous.
Right.
And as Paul Levy says, both end up, whether you're talking quantum physics or going to the depths of our psyche, in the stages that you've reviewed of consciousness, we both end up, he says, at consciousness. Both end up at consciousness, whether it's quantum physics or delving into the depths of psyche.
Yeah, and I mean, it happens in all species, I'm convinced, because the spirit is trying to come through life to something. We don't know what that is. And this has been an observation of Dr. Thomas Arst, who wrote the first essay in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, and he's an editor of this series. And I've read several essays out of this series onto the YouTube channel. But, you know, he quoted Jung in that essay saying that, you know, we don't know where the spirit is trying to take us, and it's trying to take all of us. So what I wanted to observe was that, you know, I used to have collie dogs, and I used to walk them out to this beautiful overlook every day. And I walked them 4 times a day for 15 years. And then I had my knee replaced. but the point I wanted to make was there's this overlook that looks out onto the Chesapeake Bay and the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and it's quite beautiful. And I remember my colleagues would just go out there and they would just stare at it also. I mean, it was very clear to me that they were seeing the beauty of that. And we all of us have been led to beauty, okay, one way or another. All creatures have been. And, you know, human beings become more and more beautiful creatures as we develop, because we select for beauty. And so the spirit is taking us somewhere, but we don't know where, and we need to think about that.
Quick story about dogs on Facebook. There's a video of this cutest little dog. He's sitting in a chair at the table with his master. His master has a plate of food and he's eating, and the dog is very polite. It's just sitting there and it's licking its lips, and then the master gives it some food, and then it just still sits there very politely waiting, and the master is eating, and then the dog sticks his paw out onto the master's hand or arm, you know, like, what about me, you know? But you know, the dog could have just, you know, lurched forward and wolfed down the plate, but no, it was actually very polite. And you know, so anyway, these animals do have spirit higher
with
levels than we think of,
right,
typically.
And they definitely learn. So anyway, and we all are learning as we go through life. So section 2, we're only up to section 2 on this essay, but I want to press on. So section 2, quantum physics and the spiritual foundation of the empirical world. If we want to characterize Carl Gustav Jung's psychology in one sentence, we can say that analytical psychology embodied in the archetype structure leads us to the view that there is a part of the world that we can't see, a realm of reality that doesn't consist of material things, but of non-material forms. These forms are real, even though they are invisible, because they have the potential to appear in our mind and act in it. In the following sections, we will show that that view of the world is identical with the ontology of quantum physics. Our description is necessarily short, but the interested reader will find many details and references in our previous works. Okay, so any comments on that? Okay, stepping forward now, I'm into the paragraph you were talking about, Gray, that the basis of the material world is non-material. This is point 3. The first aspect of the quantum world that we have to consider concerns the fact that the basis of material things is not material. This view is in complete contrast to our experience of the world, but it follows from Schrödinger's quantum mechanics, which is currently the only theory that allows us to understand the properties of atoms and molecules. In this theory, the electrons in atoms and molecules aren't tiny material particles, little balls of matter, but standing waves or forms. All atoms consist of a positively charged nucleus, which contains most of the mass of an atom, and of electrons, which are somehow arranged in the space surrounding the nucleus. Electrons are tiny elementary particles. They are definite mass, and whenever we see one, it appears as a tiny dot. For example, as a flash on a TV screen or a little mark on a photographic film. To contrast to their appearance, the electrons in atoms and molecules aren't tiny material particles or little balls which run around the atomic nuclei like planets around the sun, but they are standing waves. When an electron enters an atom, it ceases to be a material particle and becomes a wave. We owe Max Born for the discovery that the nature of these waves is that of probability waves. That is, the electrons in atoms are probability fields. Okay, I'll stop there for the moment. Any comments on that?
I'll talk a little bit about something in biology that we teach, and I talked about what I thought about when I read this section was both cellular respiration and photosynthesis, the two ways that most cells transfer energy. Well, but one of the themes in biology that you think about, biology doesn't really have laws as much as physics does, but we have themes. One of the themes is that life depends on the transfer of energy and the transformation of matter. And so as you're reading about these electrons, which again, both photosynthetic organisms and anaerobic respiration organisms, consumers like us, have to do with the transfer of electrons. And it's within the transfer of electrons that, for us, a glucose molecule gives us energy, but at that same time, that glucose molecule turns into carbon dioxide. And for a plant, as it's making a sugar, it's using the energy from the sun to transfer carbon dioxide molecules to add the hydrogen that makes it some sort of a sugar molecule. And so it's the electrons as they're being used that transfer that energy, and in doing so transforms the matter, which, to do that, those electrons go from, again, carbon dioxide to glucose, and then glucose back out to carbon dioxide. They are changing form technically, which is, it's pretty fascinating to even think about biologically, but it's happening on the particle level in the rest of the scientific realm as well.
Right. So there's a comment here from Winston's mom. She says something about so do ferrets, but then she says, laugh out loud archetypes. I see masculine archetypes, but no feminine archetypes on my screen. Hello, gentlemen of Dr. Conover's reading group weekly meeting. I don't know if we've scared the women off or what, but I think here, since we're talking about things that are not physical, we're talking about things that might be seen in on the feminine side of the equation. Does anybody have any comment on that?
Well, we actually had a female that was going to join, but she had something else on her schedule.
Oh, that's right. So. Yeah, she did. Yeah, she wasn't avoiding us tonight.
Right. Yeah, I just want to point that out. So.
Right. And she has a lot of wisdom too.
Yeah, but what I was thinking was I really liked the biological explanation, because the electrons. There's also ions, which are really kind of electrons. There's an ionic exchange. And it's like you've got all these little characters in here talking to each other back and forth. You know,
Right.
it's really something. And you've got this whole world going on inside of you that's just
Sure.
exchanges of information and all this good stuff. The one
Right.
interesting thing I like about biology is the brain cannot store energy.
Yeah, one of the things that
because the skull holds the brain in, and it can't make fat to store energy and get fat from it. And so you have to make sure that your energy flow is going to make sure you get enough brain power, so to speak. So it's made on the fly. So that's the only organ that I think does that. But it's. I just thought that was interesting. That,
right. So we do have some women that have commented here. Jasmine Emmerich says, woman here listening in, and Adriana says, are all feminine and masculine anyway? Yes, correct. Winston's mom, I'm just teasing you, animus, animus, you know. And okay, so they're teasing. Winston's mom, synchronicity, we are all just quantum particles connecting energy, chi. Has anyone listened to the idea of binaural beats resetting the brain? I don't know about that. Have you ever heard of that, Gray?
I think I have heard of it. There's a lot to do with sound. There's a lot to do with the movement of waves. I have a dear friend who's a biophysicist, and she works a lot with wave particles, and she tunes. She uses tuning forks and rhythm to kind of balance people's biological fields, and she has a very, very sound physics explanation for her work. So yeah, I mean, the sound particles, the sound waves, and all that stuff is a big deal.
Yeah, we obviously are learning a hell of a lot. I mean, Debbie and I just went to this event one time where a woman was using singing bowls. The typical singing bowl is from Tibet, but now people have turned them into very big ones, and you can do a whole orchestra with singing bowls. And so she was just demonstrating for an hour these things, and it was incredibly soothing. And so, you can imagine that, there are many things that we don't know yet about how our brains work. And, Debbie keeps teasing me. I commented about this on the advanced group, but Debbie keeps telling me that artificial intelligence is going to take over humanity and by 2030. And I said, no, it's not. I mean, because even though we know a lot, the best neurologist can do is hook up a brain to a electrode, and they can tell you what part of your brain is active, but they can't tell you anything about what's really going on in there, except in very, very blunt discussion. So I said, well, Deb, just I'll worry about our artificial intelligence when you can plug in a brain and play out a dream or a vision on a television screen. But until then, we don't even know about ourselves enough to, we couldn't even make an artificial intelligence creature.
I think Elon Musk would disagree with you. He's developing a chip that he can implant in the brain, so you can ask Siri just in your brain instead of talking to her, So,
well, asking Siri is one thing, but playing out the dream you had last night, that's quite a different thing, I think.
But anyway, the tuning fork is interesting because, if a sound and the two tuning forks, they'll attune to each other. And what that's doing is creating the space you're all tuning in to each other at that level of consciousness, at that
Right.
level, if you want to know what that's about. And so a long time ago, there was a Moreau Institute, and they had what they called hemisync, and you'd put on these earphones and they'd play these weird sounds back and forth.
Yeah.
You know? And so he had something going there because they thought sounds were doing it. And so somebody challenged him, and back in the old days, all your headsets used magnets.
Mm-hmm.
To make the sound, and the newer headsets don't use the magnets. They can just use a metal, different way to do it. Right. And they figured out it was the magnetic fields that were causing what was happening with all his claims. So
I had an experience with light. We visited Atlantic University at one time, which is I can't even remember the guy's name now who was running that. It's down in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And it's actually a place that I've been seeing since I was a little boy, because it's literally across the street from the Navy Officers Beach on Virginia Beach. But anyway, in there, Debbie and I bought a pair of glasses at one point, which you have to use with your eyes closed. And so it looks like a pair of glasses, but it's black. And what it does is it plays either a alpha wave or a theta wave in light, and it flashes either an alpha or a theta. And it's extremely relaxing. I found that, if I put those things on, you can't open your eyes while you're using them because it'll blind you. But if you have your eyes closed, and what happens is that at first you're seeing the pulses of the light, but you get to a point where you're just seeing white light, that your brain just readjusts to that alpha or theta wave. I forget which was which and why it was, but my experience with it was when you first turned it on, and this is for like the first 30 seconds, you could be aware of the flashes, but after that, it just became a white light, and it was extremely relaxing, like a very good meditation. And I could wear those for 10 minutes and feel like I rested overnight. They're really powerful. And then later on, I bought another pair of them off of Amazon, but I haven't been able to find them lately, so I don't know if they're any good or not. Anyway.
See, I wanted to mention that last night on 60 Minutes, there was a story about an MRI or a CAT scan or an MRI, one of those machines that measures brain waves.
Yeah, it's the fMRI, they call it.
Yeah, that's the one. And they're now able to identify a person's emotion when they're inside the machine. And they were saying that it won't be too long before they'll get a much finer grained detail of what's going on inside of a person's head when they're thinking about certain things. So I think we're not as far off as it might appear. I share some of the concerns with Elon Musk, because
sure,
one of the things that I think is not in our consciousness very much is one of the dangers with AI is not so much how great its capacity is, but how easily human beings are fooled by something that appears to be intelligent because of our projective mechanism. And so that's to me
what we think we see. Is that what you mean? We're confused by what we think we see.
Well, it's just so easy to project intelligence into another object or a algorithm, anything that has a semblance of intelligence. So the seems to me that the danger is not so much that we will be overtaken by some intelligent machine, but we will be fooled by some mechanism that somebody is using precisely to fool us, because it's really hard to make those distinctions.
Right.
Just like you can't tell if a person is real on Facebook or something, you know, the same sort of thing.
Right.
Well, it's also a manipulation. We're easily manipulated, and the bad actors can use this to simulate things and get us to agree if we're not aware that we're susceptible to these things. That's why more and more people really need to become aware of this, what could happen and what is happening.
Sure.
I saw the same show that Tim saw, and Skip, they've come a long way in terms of this imaging. And there's a lot of research going on that's really kind of scary, because if it does get in the bad hands, then it
Well, I
could
have
be
no
used.
doubt that it can be scary. I have no
But it's
doubt
also,
that.
but it also has led to a lot of medical breakthroughs and
Yeah.
various things that you know, we're alive today, some of us, just because of those breakthroughs that they've
Yep.
made. But,
No doubt about it.
but as I said, we're not in control of who's doing the research. So if a country that's bad actors, you know, they can seize upon this.
Precisely. Okay, we have an interesting question here. ISO says, Skip, is not this discussion of light and sound and an invisible energy an analog of the alchemical projections? In this way, the conspiracies realm and pseudoscience is a modern alchemy. I don't know. Does anybody have any comment on that? I mean, I think we have an alchemical pot going in the United States right now, no doubt. But go ahead, Tim.
I'm thinking about Rupert Sheldrake and his theory of morphic resonance, and the kinds of things that he's been researching for a couple of decades now are pretty astonishing. Finding evidence of I don't know how to describe this, but a kind of field that exists that can be proven in scientific experiments, but there's no empirical evidence of any kind of physical force. So for instance, this is referred to later on in the article, there are many times in history when something has appeared in different places in the earth at the same time.
Absolutely.
Inventions and so forth. And he talks about this happening in the animal world, where animals on one side of the world will learn something at the same time as animals on the other side of the world.
Right.
And he refers to that as morphic resonance. And I really think there's a lot of evidence for that.
Huge.
We've talked a little bit about dogs already, both in the chat and on the channel. But one of Sheldrake's ideas is the connection of organisms and species. You know, one with how dogs know their owners are coming home, and he also talks about evidence for morphic resonance being a soldier who's lost a limb, or someone who's lost a limb, having the feeling of that limb, even though it's not there. And then paraplegics, when you suspend them over a treadmill, and you know that they have no use of their limbs, but the legs just naturally respond as if they're supposed to. He credits that as, or he cites that as evidence for morphic resonance, that again, it's your body just responding, you know, in a very, you know, biological way to kind of what it's doing, what it's supposed to do, which, I mean, I would think would be archetypal,
Right.
or could be driven as archetypal.
let me work through a little bit more of this section 3, because we're not going to get through this whole thing tonight, that's for sure. When this aspect of electrons first became known when this aspect of electrons first became known was unclear. What are probabilities? Probabilities are dimensionless numbers, ratios of numbers. Probability waves are empty and carry no mass or energy, just information on numerical relations. Nevertheless, the visible order of the world is determined by the interference of these waves. The interferences of atomic wave patterns, for example, determine what kind of molecules can form. In addition, the interference of molecular waveforms determine how molecules interact. The molecules in your body, for example, interact in such a way that they keep you alive. And well, let me read on here. In view of these properties of the elementary units of matter, we have to conclude that the order of the visible world is based on phenomena which transcend the materialism of classical physics. If one pursues the nature of matter to its roots at the level of atoms and molecules, all of a sudden, one finds oneself in a realm of mathematical forms and numbers where all matter is lost. Thus, one is led to the view that the basis of reality is non-material. In modern science, this finding was unexpected and many scientists still don't accept it, but the idea isn't new. For example, in the 6th century BCE, Pythagoras was already teaching that all things are numbers and that the entire cosmos is harmony and number. In Plato's philosophy, atoms are mathematical forms. St. Augustine wrote in his Confessions, quote, "The older I got, the more despicable became the emptiness of my thought, because I could think of no entity in any other way than as bodily visible." Moreover, Nicholas de Cusa, a 15th century German theologian, I think he was Swiss, but anyway, is credited with the statement, "Number was the first model of things in the mind of the creator." And at this point, the reader may already note the importance of the quantum world for Carl Gustav Jung's psychology. The discovery of a realm of non-material forms which exist in the physical reality as the basis of the visible world makes it possible to accept the view that the archetypes are truly existing, real forms which can appear in our mind out of a cosmic realm in which they are stored. Thus, we can confirm here, on the basis of the quantum phenomena, Jung's view that it is not only possible, but fairly probable even, that psyche and matter are two different aspects of one and the same thing. Okay, I'll stop there. So, okay.
One of the sentences that there was a sentence about information. When this aspect of electron first became known, it was unclear what are probabilities. Probabilities are dimensionless, numberless ratios of numbers. Probability waves are empty and carry no mass, just information on numerical relations. And again, I'm not a physicist. I'm a biology person, so what came to me again was another kind of core theme of biology, or unifying theme of biology, which is life depends on a flow of information. We've talked about DNA. Not only does DNA reside in most all of our body cells, that information is moved every time that cell splits, and then furthermore, that information is shared to code for proteins that cell makes to do whatever it is that cell does. And so in the movement of that information, life is able to interact with each other, but it's also sending signals throughout the body, right? And information moves from different types of cells, and so if that happens on the cellular level, again, on the psyche level, or you know, it kind of even harkens back to the cycloid level that we talked about earlier. You know, you would then consider that those moving, you know, those moving parts of our emotion kind of come in as forms and have the ability to speak to us the materials that they're trying to give us.
Right. One interesting observation I remember recently was, if aliens came to Earth, they might not see us as individuals, but rather as colonies of cells, or colonies of intelligent beings in a sense, and that sort of comports with this Donald Hoffman's view that consciousness was the beginning of the universe, because in some way, I mean, every atom that adheres to another atom, let's call it a hydrogen atom or helium atom, every one that adheres to another one somehow is conscious that that other atom is like it. Is that fair enough?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so every iron atom knows that the other atoms that are next to it are also iron, and therefore they hang together.
Yes.
In a stronger or weaker way.
No exceptions at all. Huh?
Well, no, some of them fly apart, of course.
Yeah,
but
that's what I mean.
yeah, that's the other side of it.
I'm not sure if it's in this report or whether it was with Dr. Hoffman's video or Dr. Lanza, but there's a couple of hundred forces or coefficients or constants that if any of them were just out by a fraction of a percent, we wouldn't be here. You know,
Right.
So for example, the moon, without the moon, there would be no life on Earth.
Yeah.
And apparently, even if Jupiter didn't exist, we'd be in serious trouble. I don't know what Jupiter's doing, but it's doing something, you know. So anyway, and these physicists and mathematicians, they've used numbers to establish how finely tuned this machine of the universe is. You know, it's like a watch. So there has to be a watchmaker behind it all, right?
Right. My friends who are astrobiologists, that is, they're interested in biology outside of Earth, and one of them is the chief scientist of the Mars program, says, chief scientist of the Mars program at NASA, and he says that there are 300 amino acids, and Gray might be able to speak to this, 300 amino acids, but all life that we know of on Earth only uses about 20 of them. Yep. And so it could be that there could be other types of living beings that are using amino acids in different ways to also have life elsewhere in the universe.
Yeah, it's the 20 to 22 that are found on Earth doing what we're doing now and making us up in the ways. And again, when you think about, that's how both plants and animals and fungi and protists, you know, all of them are being built from, you know, those 20 something amino acids, and that's, you know, there's a lot of, you know, protein development, which is what amino acids work together to bring together, you know, is more credited to RNA than DNA, and you know, the interaction between RNA and protein is, you know, proteins are made by DNA giving information to RNA, and then RNA translating that information into a functional protein. And so in doing that, there are a lot of biologists who now think that it's the relationship between the RNA and the amino acids that's primary to biological structure, not necessarily DNA. That's called RNA world theory, which is one of the more plausible theories of how, quote, life began. It's one of the better guesses that we have at this point, whatever that means.
Right. So ASOS says, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name, sir, or madam, I don't know whether you're a man or woman, but anyway, however, our unconscious may intuitively sense a manipulation and lead us collectively in the correct direction. I think we may be unconsciously stronger than is admitted. And certainly that is true in what Dr. Jung said, in the sense that he spoke of the 2 million year old man, but now we pretty much agree that it's the 3.5 billion year old man, 3.5 billion year old man, or human. And so the point is that every one of our ancestors, going back millions of generations, has done two things successfully. It's survived until it reproduced. And that's an unbroken chain for every single one of us. I mean, if it failed to reproduce, obviously we wouldn't be here. And, on the other hand, in my history, I have my grandfather whose fiance was together with her 4 sisters, died on one weekend from the Spanish flu in 1918. And therefore, my grandfather married my grandmother. And so I was lucky. Thanks to the flu, right? So lots of things can happen, but the point is that our unconscious does intuitively give us messages that keep us alive, and has done since the beginning of life. And any comment on that, Gray?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how the unbroken chain of reproductive success, if you consider it for just momentarily, and you should find it miraculous. I don't know of another interpretation. I mean, it's if that theory of how life is working together, is remotely correct, that's one of the most impressive things that a human being could conceptualize, in my opinion. But anyway, that's just that's the only thing I was really thinking when you were talking that through.
Yeah.
There's also a phenomenon that they've discovered called genetic shuffling. So that when you start to make to split and make a vavy or something in the sperm or the egg, it actually shuffles your genetics, and so you don't really get a replica of your gene.
Yes.
And it's shuffled for every sperm that's formed. So even millions and millions of things, all these go through a shuffle before they form one of the sperm. So
before reproduction, in both sperm and egg, there's genetic crossover to where whatever it is that you are reproducing will not be exactly you.
That's right.
It is not the exact replica of the mother's DNA and an exact replica of the father's DNA. Even it is a genetically shuffled mother's DNA and a genetically shuffled father's DNA, which is that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and that's also there's some dangers because of the cloning that's going on that we've banned, but at the same time, bad actors don't necessarily listen to rules. So
yeah, that's the problem. Okay, well, I don't think we're going to get through entirely point 4, but I can begin it because it's 3 pages long out of the 17 pages. but I can begin it. And so let me do that. So consciousness is a cosmic property. And this comports with Dr. Hoffman, Donald Hoffman's talk. So an important concept that arises in the quantum phenomena concerns the wholeness of the physical reality. By the concept of wholeness, we mean that seemingly separated things can be connected and can act instantaneously in each other over arbitrarily long distances. In a holistic universe, decisions made by an observer in one part of the world can have an instantaneous effect on the outcome of processes somewhere else, an arbitrarily long distance away. For example, a thought that appears in my mind at this moment may instantly appear in your thinking somewhere else in another part of the world. In physics, we speak of nonlocality when two particles which at one time interact and then move away from one another can stay connected and act as though they were one thing, no matter how far apart they are. And of course, this is a basis of quantum mechanics, and Einstein referred to it as spooky action at a distance, but Einstein was wrong this time around, that it actually is the basis for communications and in various ways. And what I know that they've done with quantum mechanics so far is that if you have two particles which have ever interacted like they're talking about, they do instantaneously act on one another. Okay, it's sort of like well, what's it like? It's like a card that if you show the face of the card, then the people on the other end are going to see the back of the card always. Okay, that the card will, if the coin is flipped, you'll see the heads and the other person will always see the tails. And so, as I understand it, if you can do that with 40 different interactions, then you can have a supercomputer that's instantaneous and doesn't depend on the speed of light. So that's what I was going to observe, but any other thoughts on that?
Nope. That stuff. No. I'll stick to the biology.
It may be a little beyond us. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I'll read on and see if we catch on. We do have a lot of activity on the chat. So Opiami says even physicists are unclear on what subatomic atoms or neutrons or dark matter is. Definitely. Ancient Vedas or Tao seem more clear in an abstract way. Very, very true. And, the crazy thing is that Neil deGrasse Tyson, he following in Sagan's footprints, is adamant that there's only the physical world. And yet when you make him talk about dark matter and dark energy, then he sounds like an old-time alchemist of the first order. So Winston's mom, in Jungian typology, there was a recent uproar over a video about Jungian sperm. Can I say that here? Check out 2 videos, C.S. Joseph and Flow State, to see the comedy ensue. Well, okay, that's not going to be tonight's topic. I haven't heard that one before. Nick John, the philosophy of time travel, and Donnie Darko mentions iron when illustrating the artifact. I think I'm going to, and then Winston's mom, the Tao of Pooh, everything we need to know we learned in the 100-acre woods. and or kindergarten. I prefer the Tao to the other Tao. Right. Very much so. Okay, I'm gonna let that roll for a while here. Okay, the word in the world of ordinary things, no influence or signal can travel at a speed faster than the speed of light. Thus, any action taken at one part of the world can have an effect somewhere else only after the time that it takes for a signal to get from one point to the other. In the quantum world, the situation is different. Influences can act instantaneously over arbitrarily long distances, in principle from one end of the universe to another. The aspect of the wholeness of reality can be described in a simple way in connection with the wave properties of elementary particles. In the previous section, we have seen how the electrons in atoms are waves. Whenever we see an electron, it appears as a material particle. However, inside an atom, it is a wave. This metamorphosis of particles to waves and waves to particles is a general phenomenon that doesn't only describe the modes of existence of electrons, but is a characteristic of all elementary particles, atoms, and molecules. It means that whenever we see what we call an elementary particle, it appears as a tiny material thing at a specific position in space. In contrast, when such a thing is on its own, like when it is in a vacuum, it ceases to be a material particle and becomes a wave. You can think of this process as a spontaneous transition of what we see as a particle from its particle state to its wave state. Now, the thing that really struck me about this is that, of course, it's fairly common knowledge that light can be either waves or particles, and it depends on, I guess, the observer. And what I didn't know is that the observer is only observing the particle, not the wave. And also what I didn't know is that this applies to all atomic particles, not only to light, but to all atomic particles. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I know a photon is massless. It doesn't have any mass at all. So how do you explain that? You know, it's like,
I don't know.
It's inconceivable, you know?
Yeah,
So it almost proves the theory. But anyway, the Chinese are developing some uses of the quantum computing.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that this is true, what you're saying.
Right.
And they don't really care if you can prove it or not, but they're using it. They're making practical application of it, even though they can't explain it.
Definitely.
And so they've made some advances in terms of being able to transmit. They're erecting some satellites using lasers, and they have a demonstration in China right now. And they've got satellites, and they can detect if someone were trying to break into your network while we're talking and try to steal information. They can detect that and just shift it to another fiber link because it interrupts the field.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And so they know it's true, but they don't know how it works, but they know that they can use it.
Yeah.
So this is how far advanced they're becoming. And there's a race for quantum computing that's going on. And the implications are like, you know, you could have, as you say, it's faster than any signal can. They've promised in 10 years they're going to have an Ethernet that's not dependent upon the speed of light.
Right. And well, the thing that suggests to me that we may have similar things in the U.S., although not publicly known, is just the defense budget, which before 2000, the U.S. defense budget was something like $350 billion a year, and that was running 12 aircraft carriers and 3 divisions of Marines and so on. But the defense budget is now gone up to over 700 billion, so it's doubled And I keep asking the question, what are we spending all this money on? Where's it all going? Because we've built only one aircraft carrier since then, which is the Ford. And aircraft carrier is 10 billion, and putting the air wing on it's another 10 billion. And maybe it's another 10 billion over 10 years to crew it. So that's 30 billion of, 350 billion extra, right? And meanwhile, we've taken at least one aircraft carrier out of service. So actually, that's not costing anything extra. And we do have sort of a division of Marines additional now. It used to be 175,000 in the Marine Corps. Now it's about 200,000. And so that's roughly equivalent to a division. And a division costs $1 billion. $1 billion a year, I think, to pay the salaries and to fully equip a division. So $10 billion over 10 years. And so that's 1 billion of a additional 350 billion. So it seems to me we're doing a lot of research that's quite secret. I mean, as I understand now, there are more than 750,000 people in the U.S., nearly 1 million people who have top secret clearance. And so there's a lot going on behind the scenes, obviously. But I don't know about you, but my CNN and MSNBC the last couple of weeks has been seriously disrupted, as says my internet. So I don't know if we've
well, that's one of the dangers, is that with the quantum computing, that it poses a danger where they could break in and they can do all sorts of mischief. And there's no standards for this. Something that's not secret is Lockheed Martin, the aircraft manufacturer, big defense contractor, has developed a quantum computer. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that they're so expensive to develop that you share them just like a cloud. You go to a cloud and you can share the space, because it's going to be very expensive because it requires cooling and all sorts of different things. But it's here, it's on its way, and we're competing for it. So Google's involved with this. Elon Musk is involved with this. So, I mean, it's coming, and we need to be aware of it. So
sure. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to read on a little further here. In an Infinite Potential, this is the book these gentlemen published in 2013, this phenomenon has been described in the following way. At the foundation of the visible world, we find entities which always appear to us as elementary things when we interact with them. However, when they are on their own, they become waves. As waves, they have lost all mass, and they have become pure forms, patterns of information, something mind-like and thought-like. Accordingly, we can call the units of existence at the foundations of the world ETs. I'm sure they said that with tongue-in-cheek, meaning elementary things of elementary thoughts, or simply entities. And they did a play on having capital E's and capital T's throughout that. Being a localized material particle is one state of existence of an ET. Being a non-material wave is another. As it turns out, the wave state is the preferred state of an ET. It is the home where it will go when it is left alone. As a wave, an ET has lost all of its mass. It has become a non-material and invisible form, and since waves are extended in space, it has no specific position in space, but many potential positions. We say that an ET in its wave state is in a state of potentiality. Since material particles, whenever we see one, always appear with a specific mass at a specific point in space, we must conclude that ETs in a state of potentiality aren't a part of the empirical world. By making a transition into a wave state, an ET leaves the empirical world. This phenomenon is general and cosmic. There is a realm of the universe that we can't see. It is a background of non-material forms, not things. The forms are real even though they are invisible, because they have the potential to appear in the empirical world and act in it. In fact, we must now think that the entire visible world is an emanation out of a non-empirical cosmic background, which is the primary reality, while the emanated world is secondary. So that non-material cosmic background would be the pleroma in Gnosticism and Jungian psychology, I think. But any comments on that?
Another red book, and I can't remember, Skip, you may be able to draw this. I thought about while you were reading this, that the new God will be found in the relative, is something that Jung talked about, and everything being wave and everything, that when you're not looking at it, it makes, and I know we've talked a lot about light and the speed of light. And so relativity has been a big part of but that just struck me as a statement. Again, I can't relate the science of the specifics of the physics to it, but it seems like that is something that we're discussing here.
Right, and the theologians say that man is made in God's image, and I think that we could say that, wow, the theologians actually got it right. That
right.
To the extent that the pleroma emanates as something, it emanates as now us. So it's obviously there's something like 8 million species on the planet Earth, but only we have developed enough knowledge and experience so that we can think like we're doing tonight and interact the way we're doing tonight. And so that has made us godlike. And to be godlike means also to have the ability to destroy the world, of course. Yeah, so
I wonder what the atheists like Sam Harris think when they read stuff like this, because everything that we're just now reading, we're actually talking about ourselves. We are these molecules and these electrons that become waves. So it's basically expressing that spirit is a reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I just shared a link in the chat, an interview with a Dr. Lanza, I forget his first name, but he's a physicist, and his specialty is biocentrism. And from what I gather, I'll probably have to listen to this interview 3 times before I really understand it, but biocentrism is saying that life preceded the material world and that death is an illusion. So, in a sense, this is sort of going along with this concept of death being an illusion. If we just end up, changing into waves at the end of this life, these waves of entities.
Well, there's no doubt that we survive our deaths in some way. And I do have a question from someone about after death, and I don't know that we can define it real well, but what is clear is that famous figures like the Buddha and Jesus Christ and Abraham and Isaac and all those people are immortal. So is Beethoven, and so is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and so their effect passed down through the centuries superseded their physical existence. And Jung, I mean, Jung is still alive in spirit with us tonight because we're talking about him tonight, and he's been dead for nearly 70 years. And so, or nearly, 60 years, I guess. But
well, his spirit is still with us here. So
very definitely. Okay. And so that's a kind of immortality. But you know, there's two ways to look at it. You know, there's a psychologist, there was a man named Ernest Becker who wrote Denial of Death, and he said that human beings are afraid of death, and therefore they make a lot of decisions based on that fear of death. And there was a famous comment that Bill Clinton carried that book, Denial of Death, on his honeymoon. Quite cheery for your honeymoon, I guess. But in any case, he's an interesting fellow, and there's a lot of work done around his theories. But, you know, another way of looking at it in a purely physical world is when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. When you're stupid, it works the same way, right? And so there's nothing to fear in death per se, but as Edinger said, and when he was dying from bladder cancer, I believe, at the age of 76, and he said, "Well, I'm not afraid of death at all, but I'm not looking forward to what it takes to get there." So our physical being, you know, is going to die. We all know that. But, you know, if we do things that are meritorious, they're going to continue after our death one way or another.
I would also say your body's programmed to rebel against that. You know, you're quite biologically designed to not, or at least to
not die,
to try not to die, right? But which is a contradiction, because you are in fact dying, right? But anyway, this opens up different ways of interpreting that, right? Because what we see, or in the spirit of this time, you know, our grasp of death is just likely short-sighted.
Yeah, and so we just need an appropriate philosophy to face it. Each one of us has to face it one way or another, I suppose. So we're cooking along here. I'm sort of in the middle of section 4. I think that this essay is worth further discussion, which I'd like to continue to take up next week, and it may take 2 to 3 weeks to get through the whole thing, but it seems to have stimulated both interest in the YouTube channel and among us. And so unless anybody objects, we'll continue to talk about this, and maybe we should talk about what we've done so far. Maybe I'll look back at these chats and see if there's anything else that we really should raise here.
Yeah, there's a lot of chats there, so it would take a long time, but I mean, It's quite active. So I'm enjoying some of the comments that are coming through. So.
Yeah, there's some on MDPI.
So I think it's a very, the subject, and we need, I think the article itself stimulates the discussion to the extent that it does follow a certain track down through it. And I think if we complete that track and go through it, we'll get down to the bottom.
Right.
Particularly at the lower psyche point and the cycloid levels.
Interestingly, Winston's mom mentions Edgar Cayce, and it's Edgar Cayce who was the founder of Atlantic University that I mentioned earlier, where I got those special glasses. And she's talking about Dolores Cannon. She is interesting. We are not too far from Edgar Cayce, and I plan to visit when the weather changes or when I decide to go out among the peoples. That doesn't happen often now. Well, Atlantic University is an interesting place, and they do a lot of research on, I think, paranormal things and so on. And I can remember even when I was a little boy of maybe 8 or 10, going to the Navy Beach, which is across the street from the original building, and that building is still there. It's quite developed now compared to what it was 60 years ago. But anyway, they're very active in the paranormal, I think. And Edgar Cayce was definitely an empath, I think, and maybe a shaman. I don't know. Does anybody know a way to describe him if you know anything about him?
He was just a mystic, and he channeled all this stuff, and he really wasn't aware of himself channeling when he was channeling. So he came from another dimension and channeled it out through himself, but he didn't remember a thing he said, you know.
Yeah, but really, that's what all of us do in a conversation like this, because you know, I never remember anything that I've said in one of these sessions. I don't have a clue. I have to go back and watch the video in order to know what I've even said in one of these sessions. And I know that it's channeling directly from myself, for better or for worse. But anyway, and Winston's mom is speaking highly of your red wall behind you.
Well, thanks.
So Obiami says, if everything is the now, time as construct is a moving picture like now. Yeah, this is the eternal moment, as I've now made a practice of trying to create calligraphy for my grandchildren of the eternal moment, and so I'll look for what I'm doing for them here. But it's okay. So the great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment. And if you do not realize it, you have missed the best part of life. You have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of a life contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this eternal moment. One should take each moment as the eternal moment. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. That's slightly edited from what Dr. Jung originally said, but it's saying that, or it's a quote that everyone has found extremely powerful. And when I gave my talk about finding the living God a few weeks ago, that was the one thing that I said that really, really moved people. And it was actually the last thing in the talk. So anyway.
That statement, Skip, reminds me of what Gebser called, Jean Gebser called the ever-present origin. And he talked about time being, you know, kind of, are you experiencing everything in a manner in which you could either let go or act. and that notion just kind of made me kind of remind me of it. That's Jean Gebser with the ever-present origin, and he talked to take it back to the time. He talked about how time was a force, not a divided, materialistic way of looking at it. I mean, we look at time very materialistically right now, and it's divided, and because of that looking of time, he says something to the effect of, and you'll love this. I think the Jungian and you will love this. He said that anybody who says, oh, I just don't have time, is also saying they don't have a soul, which is kind of a, and he didn't, it's just it wasn't a punchy statement within the book. It was just very matter of fact, that's a misinterpretation of how we see time right now.
ISOS says, Jean Gebser, German, August 20th, 1905 to May 14, 1973, was a philosopher, a linguist, and a poet who described the structures of human consciousness.
He's a friend of Jung's too.
Yeah.
He quoted Jung a whole lot in that. Like, I mean, his Jung is I think Jung is his most quoted psychologist for sure. Anyway.
Yeah. And
there are some physicists, I don't know if it's Dr. Robert Lanza or was it Dr. Hoffman that you provided a link to, saying that time is only a tool that we have to contend with because of our limited brain power or our limited consciousness, that we can only handle the now. We can only process the now, and so I have a hard time getting my head around time being a tool that is restricted to us. But anyway, that's what some of these physicists are talking about.
One thing we know is that there are many, many different people, philosophers, ideas, etc., floating around on the internet. And years ago, in previous centuries, they were all pretty much canalized into the great religions. But today, they're everything. When I look at the ACT group where I spoke, they're into Reiki and all kinds of other things. And I think that we're in the process of reemerging in a different way and understanding the world and life itself in a different way. And, one way is to talk about Jung, and Jung's been very meaningful in my life, but there are many, many different ways of looking at the world, and it's just fascinating to see how that's developing and how it's changing us as a species. I mean, even I remember about 15 years ago, I was actually shocked when I heard that Saudi Arabia had opened up the internet and allowed women to use it because they've been so repressive of women over, since forever. And suddenly, Saudi women can interact, or I don't know if they can watch this live, but they can certainly see the YouTube replays of it and everything else. And so that they can see that women in other parts of the world aren't treated in the same ways. I mean, even in the Muslim world, there's 56 Muslim countries, and they can see that they're treated the most restrictively of any of them. And so things like that are just completely changing the world. The internet is has just busted everything wide open, really, religion and everything else. So it's just fascinating to see how we are changing and how we understand we're changing. Any other thoughts? Adriana asks, is this live conversation on every Monday? And the answer is yes. And Gray has answered her, actually. All right. Vince's mom says, Sam Harris's mother was the creator of the show. By gosh and by golly, that is the best piece of showbiz trivia I have heard lately. I think Sam Harris looks like Ben Stiller. All right. And Nick Chan says, time presents as fluctuating densities of probability. There's a time for everything, as the bird said, quoting the Bible. Strange how that isn't enough writing on the wall. Okay. Anyway, I'm hoping this is helpful. Any other thoughts before we call it a night here?
Well, I think thanks for this is our moment, and I think this is our moment. So let's enjoy and remind ourselves that this is our moment, and let's do it.
Well, and I'm thankful to live in the United States, where we have one holiday a year that is enjoyed by every American, and that's the Thanksgiving holiday. And it's the one holiday a year when we can be with family and share those things. So I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And Miles will be thinking of you too, even though you're not American. Do you have another Thanksgiving, do you not, Miles? Another day or something?
Yeah, ours is back in October because we're further north. The harvest had to come in earlier. So we had ours a month ago.
And thank you, Gray, for your super chat. I very much appreciate that.
You always remind you that you at least buy you a cup of coffee. That'll give you a cup for, if you go to Waffle House, I'll give you a cup of coffee for a week.
Thank you so much. And one other thing I should mention, Miles suggested to me the other day that if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit either a thumbs up or a thumbs down about what we've said tonight, because either a thumbs up or thumbs down gets YouTube's attention, because they know that we're reaching out to people. And so I'm very grateful, and I'm very grateful for all the new subscribers that this channel has been getting, because it's been a huge following. And for example, I did read the first few sections of this essay, and in less than 24 hours, it had 345 hits, which is an incredible response. I mean, okay, I'm not up to these other guys, but it's growing, and it's growing very fast, it seems. So I appreciate the following. And so, Tim, happy Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Wish we could share it with you in Montana.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye. And good night, Gray.
Good night. Y'all have a good night.
Yeah,
Jerome. And we'll hope we have some women next time around, or at least
you need to recruit, go out and recruit. So,
well, if any of you women who are watching would like to join this panel and be part of the discussion, please feel free to to write to me, and we can add you to the panel, and others as well. I mean, many of you have had comments on the chat, and so if you're not afraid of facing the public in your real avatar, it would be great to see you. So please write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com if you'd either like to have access to the Dropbox, number one, which is filled with special little treasures, and the other is if you want to join this panel. So, and the other is if you want to join the advanced reading group, which is something else that isn't on the YouTube channel. So anyway, nice to have you this evening, and we'll see you next Monday. For advanced reading group members, just recall we will not be having a session this Wednesday because of the holiday, but I'll see you a week from Wednesday. So
Happy Thanksgiving again.
Yep.
Everybody.
Peace. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.